Textiles are Korea's largest export. 1/3 of Korea's GNP is intended for export. And there is a problem. Korea's almost total dependence on other countries. The U.S. and Japan import 70% of Korea's exports, and the economic difficulties of both Japan and the U.S. are reflected here.
Oh, well, last year and this year is really we are hard hit. Well, because of the United States recession and Japanese recession, our export to these major market has been very sluggish. In case of Japan, up to the end of May, our cumulative total of our exports was about 60% of what we exported last year.
U.S. foreign investment eyes have increasingly been looking elsewhere, increasing Korean dependence on Japan. Driven back to vassal status with Japan is not something Korea wishes. An attending problem, other nations have used Korea for undesirable production, meaning that nations have exported their pollution problems to Korea. President Park's dilemma, an economic slowdown produces domestic unrest, continued growth increases foreign control, and that could produce unrest. Agriculture development in South Korea has been virtually ignored. It had been the breadbasket while the North was industrial.
Before the end of World War II, the North Korea used to have over 90% of electric power and over 60% or more of the heavy industry located in North Korea. And in the South, mainly agricultural and the light industry. But after 60, and at this time, that is not true anymore. Our country, the Republic of Korea, far ahead of North Korea. I'd like to give you some figures. The last year, Republic of Korea per capita income was $513 compared to North Korea's $313. That indicates the general living standard of Republic of Korea is far ahead of North Korea. Last year, our trade volume exceeded $11 billion, but North Korea was only $1.3 billion, so about 1/10 of our trade volume. Per capita income, early 60s was only $70, but last year, $513. So because of the political stability and also the export-oriented developmental strategy. This export-oriented developmental strategy gives us the opportunity to compete with other countries in the world market, and also we are forced to improve our productivity and our competitive power. So this is the secret of our rapid growth.
South Korea must import massive amounts of food and is not self-sufficient in that area. Much of its food is aid from the U.S. and Japan.
Korea is in the process of modernization. The modernization started with the industrial sector, and the agricultural sector was a little bit lagging. But last year's figure indicates the farmer's household income is higher than the city worker's household. That indicates our farmer's income is increasing. And the government is encouraging this new seed, the miracle rice. We developed our own type of miracle rice, and the supply of fertilizer and irrigation. And the most important thing is a high price support system to give higher incentive to the farmers.
Well, does this renewed concentration on agriculture involve a redistribution of the population at all?
Our rural people, because of their low income, they started moving to the urban area, especially our capital city. Our capital city now, the population is 6.4 million people living in this city. But after this new village movement, this trend reversed, that the population movement from rural area to urban area, they changed from city back to their homes, the farms.
The argument heard most often in the U.S. against the status quo is that the government of President Park is repressive. To that charge, this response.
I don't think repressive is the right word. We would not pretend that we are an ideal democracy or we have absolute freedom. We are imperfect and our freedom is limited. But the need for restraint is quite obvious if you look at the circumstances under which we have to survive. We have already discussed the North Korean threat. We have already discussed the lack of balance in the alliance systems, alliance structures. We have already discussed the psychology of insecurity on the part of South Korean people because of the experience of the North Korean attack in the summer of 1950.
The Park regime, in simple terms, is a dictatorial, authoritarian, oppressive, harsh regime. It's a regime which has resorted to torture, harassment, intimidation, fabrication of plots, slander, corruption, kickbacks, and ultimately murder in order to maintain itself in power.
Give me an example.
On April 9th of this year, 8 men were hanged as accused of being part of a massive plot to overthrow this government. Every indication that we have, all the evidence that we have unearthed through deep research and extensive study of the situation indicates that the men were not only innocent of the charges brought against them, but that they did not even know each other prior to their arrests.
Our critics, so-called critics, are so busy criticizing us that they apparently have no time to think about North Korea. As I said, repressive is a relative term. So is the concept of freedom. And I said we don't have absolute freedom, but we have limited freedom. And if you compare our situation in this regard with North Korea, I think there is an absolutely unbridgeable gap. There is an astounding contrast.
Do you think that the powers that the Park regime has assumed can be justified by the threat from the North?
Not at all. I think that the people of South Korea are quite capable of defending themselves against the North. Now, please be very certain that there is a threat from the North. I think there always has been. I think that Kim Il-sung has demonstrated that he is quite anxious to unite this country by force. But the fact is that this threat has been greatly heightened by the recent activities of President Park himself, who by trying to scare up the people in the South against this terrible aggressor in the North, have actually destroyed or dissimulated or drastically weakened any spirit that they might have to resist the North.
Democracy is not something that you can put up overnight at a factory. It has to grow on the soil which has been inherited throughout our history. And the soil is not necessarily friendly to the plant of democracy. And what the U.S. involvement does here is not to bring to us the gift of democracy as a ready-made good, but to offer us the opportunity to develop democracy through our own efforts. And this is precisely what we are trying to do. And I wish that American people would understand that through their sacrifices, by coming here and staying with us, they are giving us this possibility, this chance, this opportunity to develop democracy through our own efforts. And this is the most significant part of U.S.-Korean relationship.
Now back at my desk in New York, there's been time for reflection. More on that in one moment. Since my return, there's been a Harris poll showing an American willingness to defend South Korea. I've heard the nuclear rattles of both President Ford and Defense Secretary Schlesinger, and of course the new alert in South Korea. Today, the U.S. and South Korea offered to terminate the UN command, contingent on North Korean and Chinese pledges to continue the armistice. This to avoid an embarrassing vote in the UN General Assembly this fall. None of which changes anything. Economically, South Korea has soared since the 60s. Militarily, she is strong, failing only to match the strength of the North in the Air Force. The ROC Army is willing to fight. China's wish for détente with the U.S. to slow any growth of Russian influence seems to preclude any urging of Kim Il-sung to move south. Repression in the South, certainly. Government criticism has been outlawed. A political party can be outlawed by presidential edict. There are curfews and call-ups, but evidence indicates it's more restrictive in the North. If it were not for the tunnel truculence of Kim Il-sung, President Park might not be able to impose those restrictions. So in a manner of speaking, Kim Il-sung provides a power base for President Park. South Korea cannot be castigated for having less economic military concentration than has the North. So it seems the U.S. is going to stay with or without the UN flag, and with our flag, the status quo. As one who has seldom seen morality and foreign policy in the same bed, I can only hope that big power national self-interest will dictate that the game be played out between North and South without the gun. I'm Roger Grimsby.